It is time for the video you've all been waiting for. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I love seeing these, and after this year, when I read by Goodreads 241 books, I honestly can't believe with going back to school this year that I read that many books. And I love Storygraph more than Goodreads, but the thing is that it doesn't count the books you DNF in your final count. And when I DNF a book, it's normally because I've read, like, I really hate DNFing, so I normally read like 25% to like 40% of a book before I let it go. So I like to count those in there because I do think they're books that I spent time on. So I'm gonna go with a number that's 241, even though it's more like 235. I don't DNF a lot of books, guys. So I read a lot of books this year, and I have had kind of a hard time narrowing it down. Although, honestly, after reading this much, not as hard of a time as I thought I was going to. And here's why. Out of 241 books, I only gave 5 books 5 stars this year. I am a really, really hard rater, and I feel like adding Storygraph, because on Storygraph you can do, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75. It really just helped the books that were the true cream of the crop like rise to the surface. I'm mixing metaphors, it's okay, we're gonna talk about it. Doing my least favorite books of this year was a little bit harder. I will say that I am not including DNF'd books in this list. I probably could have done, I DNF'd about 5 books, so I could have done that, but I feel like if I'm gonna say that I didn't like a book, I'm gonna give you a book that I finished because I thought it was going to be good, or I thought there was something good in it. So I read the entire thing, and I can give you an honest judgment that I didn't like it, as opposed to some of the books that I DNF'd. They're just not for me, and I don't think that's a fair reason to put them on a list like this. So without further ado, my top 5 books of this year were 4 romances and 1 nonfiction book that really for me just rose above all of the others that I read. And these are not in any particular order. To start with, I want to talk about Best of Luck by Kate Claiborne. I did an entire Kate Claiborne mega review that you can check out, but Best of Luck is the 3rd book in a series. She's most famous for love lettering, and this is the series that actually came out before that. And it's a series about 3 girls who win the lottery and what they do with their winnings. Best of Luck, like I said, is the 3rd book in that series. And it is about Greer, who has had health issues for most of her life. And so what she does with her lottery winnings is to pay back her family for things she thinks they've missed out on, or loans they took out, to deal with the American healthcare system. And then she puts herself through college she's in her 20s, but what for her feels like just like an advanced age for all of her peers. Enter the brother of one of the other girls who is in one of the first 2 books, and he is a world-renowned photojournalist who is having a rough time. He, it turns out, has developed some anxiety, which he's trying to work through, and also just has like childhood trauma from some family things that have happened. In this book, I got 5 stars from me because it was just this beautiful book where both characters were equally working through their own things and trying to put their own lives on track and help each other, but not save each other. And I think that is such a hard line for some of these romances to walk. There often seems like one partner who needs more help than the other, and someone needs to be saved, and it's all because of true love. But this is like, no, they have individual problems that require individual solutions, and they have to do it for themselves. And having someone to love you helps with that process, but it doesn't automatically just make it go away. And this book just made me really, really happy. So I gave it 5 stars. The other 2 books in the series are also excellent. You can check out more in that review if you're interested. The returning author between this top 5 and last year's top 5 is Denise Williams with this year's book, The Fastest Way to Fall. Again, I did a full review of this, but her debut novel, How to Fail at Flirting, snuck in at the last minute to my top 5 books of 2020, and her second book is here again. I'm so glad she had another book out this year. Denise Williams, I didn't think it could get much better than How to Fail at Flirting, but How to Fail at Flirting is this romance novel that at the surface seems to have a very, kind of, I don't want to say trite premise, but then you dig into it and the levels of like the personal relationships, not just the romance, but the things that they're dealing with in their own lives are so much deeper. And I was worried when I saw The Fastest Way to Fall because it was about a plus size lifestyle blogger trying out a weight loss app, which you will come to realize is just the wrong thing to call the app even in general. And she's like in competition with a skinny blonde chick from work, and it's like a whole thing, and she falls in love with her trainer. And I really was very lukewarm on that premise. But in the beginning of the book, there is discussion of eating disorders, there is a discussion of weight loss, and Denise Williams puts that all in the front of the book, but also says that for herself as a plus size woman of color, this is a book that she wished had existed for her. And reading that, as someone who has also struggled with weight in the past, I was like, okay, I'm willing to give this a shot. And I'm so glad that I did, because it's the same thing. Like, the description for Denise Williams's books, I feel almost do them injustice. Like, there are so many other issues about being a plus size woman of color, being a woman of color, being plus size. And then Wes, who is the trainer, he has his own things going on, and those have to do with a family member who has had an eating disorder and another family member who has some drug addiction problems. And like, it sounds almost like a soap opera, but it just ends up being really powerful discussions of all of these things and how they all like work together in this relationship, plus just being a really great romance. So read Denise Williams's books. There's only 2 of them, and each one of them is amazing. Highly recommend. 5 stars. I also gave 5 stars to Sarah McLean's new book, Bombshell. This is a brand new series, historical romance set in historical England, and I love Sarah McLean. I think she is the queen of historical romance for me. And the series that she just started is a new one called Hell's Bells, which Bombshell is the first one. And it is the sister of the girl who stars in my favorite Sarah McLean book of all time. And I feel like this series has the potential to blow those books out of the water. The main character in this one, she is the kind of society girl that has basically given up on being what society wants her to be, and she has joined forces with other people, other women who are also overlooked by society to basically just like upend the lives of men who can get away with things because they're men. So it's like a romance, but it's also like a heist novel. There's some like criminal hijinks. Something explodes. It was so good, and it just made me happy. I am wondering if, because the guy in this one is also in that other book that I mentioned, and I then had to reread that other book because I was like, was this really set up in that book? And I'm not sure that it was, but I don't care because I am here for the strong women. This series seems to be promising, and I think that actually, despite the fact that I really, really wanted this book, the characters that will come later in the series have the potential to be even more awesome, strong, take no prisoners females who blow things up. And I love it. And I think that everyone should read it with me. 5 stars. So this author is technically also making a return, but I will say that this book is technically 4.75 stars because the other 5-star book on this list was a reread and I'm not including it. But it is Twice Shy by Sarah Hogel. Again, I did a review of this one. You can go check that out. Sarah Hogel's debut novel, If You Deserve Each Other, was undoubtedly my top book of last year. Twice Shy, much like Denise Williams, it's her follow-up book. I did duck it like a 1/4 of a star just because I don't think it is as good as You Deserve Each Other. But it is the story of 2 people who both end up inheriting a property, a very large property from, it's the girl's grandmother and the guy was the caretaker, and they're supposed to split it, and they both have very, very opposite views of what they want to turn it into. The girl, she's more outgoing, she wants to turn it into a hotel, blah, blah, blah. The guy is an introvert to the extreme, and he wants to turn it into an animal rescue. And they both thought that they were going to be inheriting this property singularly, and now find out that they have to work together. So I don't want to call it an enemies to lovers because the sweet thing about this book is these 2 people with diametrically opposed personalities trying to form like any kind of a relationship and struggling with that a little bit and having to learn about the other person and how to respect what the other person needs. And in this one, the guy, he has like, it's a mental health thing. Like, he is trying to work with and around, and he's trying to make himself better for her, but the story ends up being about, you know, loving people as they are, and it was just very sweet. It was so sweet. And also not a story in which, again, romance just fixes a mental health problem, because I know I've mentioned a couple of books on here where I'm like, oh, it doesn't do the thing, and that might give you an idea that they exist plentifully in Romancelandia. They don't. I have read way too many where it's just like, surprise, true love has fixed it. Drives me nuts. So, 4.75 stars. The one nonfiction book that I want to mention, which is King Richard, An American Tragedy by Michael Dobbs. This is a book, and it's so weird that it's here, because really, it doesn't offer me, as someone who's read a lot of books on Richard Nixon, any new information. But what Michael Dobbs does is this slow burn of the events leading up to the Watergate. And like a day by day accounting of the people and the things that happened and the things that were said. And instead of just like blowing the situation into what is almost a caricature at this point, you just really dig into it, and it was so good. But what made the audiobook absolutely spectacular is that at the end of every chapter, if there was like a diary or a tape mentioned, it plays you the audio of the tape. And so, you know, it's like you're listening to it and you're like, did the President of the United States really say that? Or like, did someone who works in the White House really say that? And then they play the tape and you hear Richard Nixon or John Haldeman like saying the thing. And it was such a good listening experience as like an audiobook that I feel like just blew the production value, just like highly recommend that if that's a topic that you're interested in, and listen to the audiobook. It's critical to its 5 stars. Now for the books that made me sad and that I finished all the way through. Starting with, these are in like worst to least worst order, and just in terms of my ratings. Starting with Meet Me in the Middle by Devin Daniels. This purported to be a romance between a Democrat and a Republican about how they managed to get rid of their differences to be in a relationship, even while retaining their political autonomy. Now, you might be saying, Gretchen, that's a terrible idea for a book. Why did you even think that it could be good? I don't know. I thought that the topic would at least be dealt with some nuance. It's not. The female character is a liberal, and she is very uptight and really, really sure in her opinions, and she's the one really that refuses to listen to the conservative guy because she just wants to push her bill for Congress. They're both staffers, but they're writing bills. And then the guy is a conservative, but he's like, I really just care about tax law and I like guns, and why don't we go to the shooting range so I can tell you that I'm not that bad. Get that stiletto out your butt. It was so bad. It was so bad. I kept reading it, I think, because I just wanted to see how it would land, right? And this is why I don't want to include DNF books, because the way that a story wraps up can like make or break a book. And I was like, is this really how this is going to go? It was so bad. The reviews on some of the review sites are also just hilarious. So if you're going to read anything about this book, just read the reviews where people just got like, "Rah." It's so bad. It was so bad. Again, I think that the idea was, not terrible, but holy Toledo, could you have dealt with it in more than a one-dimensional way? Wow, that was a lot. As I mentioned in my Q4 wrap-up, I have been reading the Bridgerton series with a friend, and we read To Sir Philip with Love, which is Eloise's story. And while Eloise in the books is not the same Eloise that I absolutely adore from the show, I was very excited to see her book. It seemed to have a really interesting idea where, Eloise all of a sudden decides that she does want to get married, and there's been this guy who is a widower with 2 children who she's been having a letter correspondence with, and they seem to have fallen into a friendship or something, and he needs a wife, and so she goes to see him and sees if they can be compatible. And the children are absolute hellions. There was definitely like a Parent Trap vibe where they were just so trying to get rid of her so hard until she, won them over. That was a really cute storyline. But this book and the way that it deals with suicide and depression infuriated me. I understand that if there is someone and you lose someone to suicide, which is what happens to Philip's first wife, but not a spoiler, you learn this in the beginning of the book, that you can have feelings of resentment. Like the emotional response to that is incredibly complicated. But throughout the entire book, he just puts his wife down, and basically it's like she was always like this. She never tried to be happy. She never wanted to be happy. Like, he describes their relationship as just a drag for him, where he couldn't do anything right. And again, all of those feelings are valid. It's a very hard relationship to be in, but obviously there's something more going on. They explicitly say that she was depressed, but like, she's just treated as a lazy loser for the entire book. And that was really, really frustrating. But then there's this whole bit at the end where Philip essentially says to Eloise, and this is almost a verbatim quote, that she always has to be happy for him. And she says, I will absolutely always be happy for you. You will never have to feel that way again. I'm like, what? So he's punishing her for this past relationship by saying that she can't be sad, she can't be angry, she has to be happy all of the time so that they can be happy. And this is like the moment where they like exchange I love yous, and it's supposed to be like the culminating like reunion scene of their relationship. No. Remember how earlier I was like, oh, well, I'm making it sound like there are a lot of books that deal with mental health in a really nice way. I'm like sending screenshots of like I'm reading it on my phone to my friend who I'm buddy reading with, and I'm like, I'm so mad. I'm so mad. I'm about to chuck my phone out the window. Thank God I'm reading this on my phone, or something would be broken. Angry. I'm angry. Did not like. And I hope they do not do Eloise that dirty in the TV show, or I will cry. She is much more engaging in the TV show. It will not surprise you to find that Realmbreaker by Victoria Aveyard is on this list. The video, which I titled Realmbreaker Broke Me, is one of the top viewed videos on our channel this year, so you've maybe already watched it. But Realmbreaker is an epic fantasy from Victoria Aveyard, who wrote the Red Queen series, and I hated it, which I think the low rating is partially because I just didn't enjoy it, and partially just because of how disappointed I was, because there's definitely nothing like being really, really excited for a book that just lets you down. And I've talked about how I've been having trouble with epic fantasy, multiple POVs, but this book is just so slow. And like, I read Game of Thrones. Those were also very slow. But there was just something about this book. It was like pulling teeth to finish it. And from the comments y'all have been leaving on that video since I put it up, I'm just really glad that I'm not the only person who has had that feeling. And obviously, if you like epic fantasy and you really like all that world building and stuff, you may have enjoyed it, and that's fine. But for me, it was the antithesis of anything I ever enjoy ever. And I just kept thinking it's gonna get better because I love Victoria Aveyard and I love what she writes, and it just never did. So it's on this list just because it made me sad. Made me sad. Book 4 on this list is called The Trouble with Hating You by Sanjay Patel. This is an enemies to lovers romance that was literally just like pulling teeth. Guys, I have read 240-ish books this year. I have read some poorly written romance, but I finished it because it had something to it that I was like, oh, this is like not a waste of my time. And I did finish this book, but oh my God, like the writing was not great. And this is not a Kindle Unlimited book. This is like a legit book. It's been published by an author in a publishing house, not just, again, self-published books it's not a bad way to publish your book. They just often aren't edited as well sometimes. This doesn't have that excuse. And then the guy clearly was set up to like rescue her, and there was like a sexual violence plot line. No, just no. This book mostly makes it onto this list just because of just poor writing in general, but like, oh God, no. And I love enemies to lovers. I will do so much. I will give that book so much room to not be the world's best literature, just to give me something, and this just, no. Speaking of books that were both disappointing and had bad writing, let's talk about Mr. Garcia by Tl Swann, which not only rounds out this list, but was also the last book that I finished in 2021. And was extra disappointing because if you watched my Q4 wrap-up, you know that I started reading this series by Tl Swann because I really, really, really enjoyed this author's first trilogy that I read called The Miles High Club. The thing that I liked about those books is the undoing of this book, and it is Tl Swann's most recently released book, which terrifies me because you hope that authors are getting better. So Mr. Garcia, much like Tl Swann's other books, that has this amazing plot where like the 50% mark is where another romance novel might stop, but then these books recognize that relationships are complicated, and the things that make them complicated, like you just can't have one fight and it's all fixed, right? And that's the best thing about Tl Swann's other books. This is the book that will not end. And the writing is not that great, which is weird because the other books were written fine. I don't know if this one was more rushed maybe, I don't know, but just like technically the writing is not great. And the story, which is about two people who meet at a coffee shop and then at an escort club, and they have this really, really high-flying relationship, like it's like a really fast burn, and then something happens and they break apart, and then 6 years later they get back together. So it's like pseudo second chance, which I love. I love second chance books. But like, it just wouldn't stop. And it was just, it felt like a slog. Like, how often can you say that a romance novel feels like a slog? Almost never. Because they're really fast reads. And this one I was like, oh dear God, is it over? Like at one point he becomes Prime Minister of the UK. At one point he thinks that she slept with his son. It's like, stop. But the final nail in the coffin for me is that the guy has what he considers to be deviant sexual interests. And it's basically just like, you know, he has a red room. You know, Mr. Grey will see you now, the whole shebang. But the first time that he lets her know that he has these is really not the first time, even though the book sets it up that way, because 6 years earlier, he like choked her out when they were having sex the first time. But in this moment, she says multiple times during that sex scene that she is afraid. Like she is being made to feel a little unsafe and a little bit scared by his behavior. He does not go over anything that he does to her ahead of time. There is no safe word. And it just made my skin crawl a little bit, because those, I mean, there are plenty of romance novels that deal with BDSM or other, you know, stuff like that. But I don't think we should be glorifying versions of that where the female character is genuinely feeling unsafe and we're supposed to accept that that's okay. I don't think that it is. So unfortunately, the last book that I read this year makes it onto this list, but it is what it is, I guess. The next book that I read can only be better. So those are my top 5 and my bottom 5. Do this. Top 5 and bottom 5 books of this year. And what were your best books? What were your worst books? Have you read any of these? Do you disagree, agree? Hit me up with anything down in the comments. I'll chat with you there. Other guys, I will see you guys next time.